Shadows is a very well-known book in the Warrior series, though I found over the years that a large portion of fans have an inaccurate view or series of assumptions about what this book's content actually is. If I were to summarize its structure, I would say it's a series of 3 disconnected but sometimes overlapping short stories where the first connects to the last book, Eclipse, the last connects to the next book, Sunrise, and the middle one connects most strongly to specific parts of the 4th book in the next arc and a prequel arc that will be made over 4 years after this book's release. Suffice to say, it is a lot. Whether that lot amounts to good overall quality is yet to be seen, but I know there are a good number of people who count this among their favorite books for the last third alone, and to this I say, I understand you perfectly, and this is a fine choice. Long Shadows was released on November 25th of 2008, not even 3 months after Eclipse, and, to precisely no one's surprise, not coming out on the same day as any other books because of that. No matter how you felt about the previous 4 to 6 month periods for book writing, this one coming out less than 3 months after the previous one is undoubtedly a new level of shocking. While Eclipse was written by Kate Cary, Long Shadows was written by Cherith Baldry. I imagine with even heavier guidance than normal from Victoria Holmes, thanks to this book containing the very moment that inspired this arc, and that Vicky intended to build this arc around. Still, outside of that, it's a likely assumption that the book would have to mainly focus on material completely uncovered by Eclipse. Long Shadows may also end up focusing more on plot progression and its effects, not just because of Cherith's known tendencies as a writer, but also because Vicky's hand in this particular part of the text would give at least one element of the plot an especially large amount of focus. That, however, is a hypothesis we will have to either confirm or reject later. First, let's begin with an allegiance check-in. Despite there being a full-scale, all-clan war in the last book, no casualties were had. But Poppyfrost, Honeyfern, Cinderheart, Lionblaze, and Hollyleaf were all made warriors, so there are now 21 warriors instead of 16, and 3 apprentices instead of 8. Wow! And that apprentice count is including Jaypaw, a medicine cat apprentice who is the very same age of 2 cats who are now warriors, so it's likely that even that count will go down. The only other difference is that Millie's kits, Briar Kit, Blossom Kit, and Bumble Kit, have been born and are listed in the nursery. The speaking cast of this book is 82 cats, which is actually the highest cast size not just in this arc, but in the entire series so far. And the top 10 cats have 67% of the lines, tied for the lowest in Power of 3 with Outcast. The cast is 50% she-cats, impressively even, but the she-cats in that cast only get 37% of the lines, second lowest in the arc after Outcast. These statistics may in part be affected by the highest scorer on this list, Jaypaw. He has the most lines in Long Shadows, but that means more here than it has in previous Power of 3 books. The 3 different point of view cats each getting chapters in every book would imply a roughly equal division of lines between Jaypaw, Hollyleaf, and Lionblaze. Here, however, Jaypaw has over 400 lines, almost twice the number of Lionblaze, who has the second highest lines in this book, and Hollyleaf has a couple dozen less than even him. This book is most famous for its final third, so I imagine a lot of people would assume Hollyleaf to be the focal character of the book, but as someone with at least a cursory understanding of the book's actual contents, I am fairly sure I know exactly how Jaypaw ends up as the focal character in all 3/3 of the story. Speaking of that story, let's stop dancing around and get into it. The prologue shows cats named Shadow, River, Wind, and Thunder, the founders of the clans introduced in Secrets of the Clans, meeting with Midnight, the Badger Guide from the New Prophecy. They want to know why she revealed the secrets of the clans, not the book title, to Soul when he happened by, and Midnight's defense is that telling him everything about the clans didn't put them in danger because the clans need to learn how to confront threats from the outside. Okay, well, in that case, yes, Soul's ability to manipulate the clans was entirely Midnight's fault, according to this prologue. He wouldn't have been able to act like he had supernatural foresight if he hadn't been given it for free with Midnight's total consent. Anyway, Rock, that ancient hairless, sightless cat from Fallen Leaf's time who told Jaypaw more about the prophecy and Outcast, appears and chats to Midnight about how her actions were absolutely necessary, because the 3 need to be prepared for what's coming. Still no word of what that could be, and it can't be Soul because he isn't coming, he's here. Well then, back to our main characters. Hollyleaf has a nightmare about Soul and is still worrying about him when she wakes up, since he has caused ShadowClan to abandon StarClan in the Warrior Code. the two pillars of her existence. Oh, also, Hazeltail is treating her sort of like a friend and accompanying her through most of the first chapter. Anyway, ShadowClan is also very aggressive about cats on their border, but also patronizes Hollyleaf for caring about the code, which leads me to wonder which specific parts of the warrior code ShadowClan cares about now. Birchfall gets into a fight with the ShadowClan cat, and that's the end of the chapter. In Jaypaw's world, Millie and Briarkit are coughing, and it won't be long before this cough spreads to become a giant green cough bout across ThunderClan. For now, though, Hollyleaf tries to get her brothers to help her get rid of Soul somehow, and Jaypaw still wants to get whatever information he has about the prophecy. Hollyleaf agrees with him and Lionblaze reluctantly, and they sneak into ShadowClan territory to watch one of Soul's speeches in ShadowClan's camp. He's convincing them that StarClan isn't especially powerful and can't prevent harm, and Blackstar applies this to his existing insecurity that they were wrong to go to the lake. But this doesn't reach a conclusion of any specific actions before our protagonists leave. Jaypaw also has a vision of Midnight, and talks about her to Leafpool so he can learn who Midnight even is, but they conclude that he can't just leave the clans right now to visit her, so if Midnight wants to say something, she has to come to him. In Lionblaze's first chapter, he asks to spar with Ashfur to catch up on battle training, in the hopes of becoming good enough to not need Tigerstar's teachings anymore. And Ashfur and Lionblaze get a little too fight-happy in the process. Lionblaze also gets a nightmare about accidentally murdering Heatherpaw and Tigerstar egging him on. Basically, tensions are rising for all three protagonists. The sickness is getting worse, and the war with all four clans last book trampled the catnip stems they had, so Jaypaw and Poppyfrost set about picking and protecting what is left. Jaypaw attends the Half Moon Gathering alone so Leafpool can stay back and take care of Millie and Briarkit, and there he meets both Rock and Midnight. They tell him that knowledge isn't power, faith is, and so it's perfectly fine that Midnight told Soul everything about the clans and pieces of their future. I'm still skeptical about this. Jaypaw then talks to Ragged Star and Running Nose, who tell him to fix ShadowClan for him without any guidance or assistance. Jaypaw gathers his siblings again to give Hollyleaf a chance to expound on how important it is that ShadowClan believe in their ancestors. Jaypaw is scared by her intensity. More cats are coughing. Tawny Pelt arrives in ThunderClan's camp with her kits, now apprentices, Tigerpaw, Dawnpaw, and Flamepaw. They have come because ShadowClan has adopted the philosophy that every cat, young and old, must take care of themselves, and Tawny Pelt wanted them to be somewhere safe. Despite some cries that Tawny Pelt and her kits shouldn't be allowed in ThunderClan because they are outsiders, and allowing in outsiders is what started the war with WindClan and RiverClan, sure, Firestar allows them to stay. The three protagonists agree to fake a sign from StarClan on orders from StarClan, who can't just make a sign themselves because they don't feel like it, and they recruit Tawny Pelt's kits to lead them there. By the way, more cats are sick. The ThunderClan and ShadowClan trios travel to ShadowClan and set up a sign where, when Blackstar and Little Cloud come through, led by Tigerpaw, they can tip over some trees and say in as ominous a voice as possible that they should stop denying their ancestors and that the forest will fall. Blackstar isn't convinced and wants the StarClan cat to show themselves if they want him to do anything. So Ragged Star and Running Nose come down physically to talk to him, like they definitely could have done from the beginning, to tell Blackstar to get rid of Soul and that some generic brightness will shine on ShadowClan for many moons. Blackstar is immediately convinced because his problem was absolutely just believing that StarClan didn't exist despite all previous evidence and not anything involving their philosophy or lack of involvement in the clans. All of our protagonists' efforts have been worthless, Soul will be driven out, and they can go home assured that they have saved ShadowClan. Hollyleaf then starts thinking about whether or not Soul, the cat she hates beyond reason, might now come back to train them in the prophecy. I legitimately can't make sense of that one. Little Cloud comes to bring Tawny Pelt back to her clan, perhaps a day or two after she left, and everything is back to normal. At this point, Soul meets Hollyleaf in her territory and says that she and her brothers need him because he knows things. He also asks if she's sure she's found the three. He then leaves. Hollyleaf isn't swayed at all. With that, the first short story of the book is done. It is now chapter 11. More cats are sick, but now they're out of herbs. Some chattering StarClan cats confirm that no more catmint exists on ThunderClan territory, and Millie is about to die. But a cat called Bright Spirit, along with her parents, appears to Jaypaw to tell him the wind has what he seeks. Okay, I know I usually cover the broader and meta points in the next section, but I really need to insert this here because it's the only place where it is relevant. Bright Spirit is a character made to represent a particular fan whose name I won't say for privacy, but is readily available elsewhere. She was an avid reader of warriors who, tragically, passed away alongside her parents when their house was hit by a tornado in 2008, 9 to 10 months before this book's release. This is the only book in which she appears, and on a technical sense she feels a lot like a throw-in with little value to the overall story, but Keen casting any judgments over this is the reminder that her character is a memorial to a young girl lost to the world for whom this book series meant a lot. With that said, back in the clans, more cats are sick, and this time the newest patient is Firestar himself. Pretty much every cat in the camp who isn't sick is worried about the cats who are, and a couple of nice character relationships are brought up as they do. Jaypaw uses his dreamwalking ability to go into Kestrelpaw's dream and trick the Winclan medicine cat apprentice into showing him the location of their catmint, so he and Lionblaze can steal it when they're awake. They don't include Hollyleaf because of her intense fervor for the warrior code. However, Lionblaze doesn't want to go either because of his current intrusive thoughts about killing Heatherpaw. Meanwhile, cats are getting sicker, and Firestar decides that he and all of the sick cats should go to the abandoned two-leg nest to quarantine, and so everyone works to set it up and then get them there in a sort of sorrowful parade. As soon as it is set up, Jaypaw is told to rest for a minute and forlornly travels to the lake to visit his stick. He wonders if sickness is what drove the ancient cats like Fallen Leaves away from the lake in the first place, and suddenly he sees Fallen Leaves, who isn't sure what happened to the other ancients. Jaypaw is determined to get answers and runs out of the tunnels, somehow appearing in the time of the ancients in the place of one of their cats, Jayswing. Jayswing has just become a Sharpclaw by navigating and coming out of the tunnels under their land, and he has a sister, Doveswing, who's very excited for him. Furled-Bracken, seemingly the leader of the group, officially congratulates him. Many other cats, all completely unfamiliar to Jaypaw, greet him happily. Jaypaw knows nothing at all about this world and doesn't see a version of Jayswing himself in the way that he saw Cinderheart or Kestrelpaw when he went into their dreams. Whatever this is, it is something new and something very strange. Jaypaw, in his own head, points out multiple times that he is not Jayswing, and he in fact has to convince the rest of the ancients that he is Jayswing by lying and making excuses for his confusion about their world. Things we do learn about Jayswing are that he is a relatively accomplished hunter, like Jaypaw isn't. He isn't blind, like Jaypaw is. He appears to have been kind and sociable with several different friends, like Jaypaw rarely is, and he seems to have loved Halfmoon, like Jaypaw. Well, he specifically says he doesn't love her, but he could see himself coming to love her. Jaypaw and Jayswing are not the same cat. Cats called Fishleap and Halfmoon join Doveswing in greeting him the next morning, and together they talk about how the ancients have been doing. Poorly, it turns out, since Fallen Leaves' disappearance. Apparently, several cats have been discussing that they should leave the lake completely, seemingly because a number of cats have died in the tunnels, but Halfmoon doesn't cite any more specifics than that many cats have died. The ancients hunt for themselves, don't have a set camp, don't have a medicine cat or deputy, have only the leaders they choose themselves, have no connection to any ancestors, and decide on most big decisions by casting stones in a democratic decision of all the cats there. Jaypaw and Halfmoon spend some time hunting together, until Jaypaw accidentally reveals knowledge of the mountains from his time in the tribe, and hides it by saying he had a prophetic dream, which is something none of the ancients have ever done. He quickly realizes that these ancients will eventually become the tribe of Rushing Water, and that informs his next decision. With the extra push of that dream, the group sets up a casting of the stones, with Jaypaw himself giving the last tiebreaker stone, and the ancients decide to head to the mountains, with Stone Song as their new leader. He is curious as to whether or not Jayswing will have any more dreams, and Jaypaw accidentally teaches him about their ancestors being in the stars. As soon as the ancients set off towards their new home, Rock appears to take Jaypaw back. Interestingly, Jaypaw asks if the real Jayswing will come back, and Rock tells him that he disappeared suddenly at the start of the journey. Jaypaw wonders if there were versions of each of his siblings in the past somewhere too, and is assured that the three have returned. Back in the present, even more cats are sick, and Jaypaw still has a job to do. Daisy also briefly confronts a very sick Spiderleg about his ongoing avoidance of their kits. Leafpool weighs in and seems especially interested in Spiderleg understanding how valuable his experience as a parent could be. Firestar loses a life, which finally pushes Lionblaze to agree to steal the catmint from Winclan with Jaypaw. While there, they run into Heatherpaw, now Heathertail, and after she says Lionblaze doesn't scare her, Lionblaze attacks her, calling her a traitor and barely managing to step away before he kills her. Heathertail leaves him with a warning that he had better not become like Tigerstar, and the brothers return with the catmint. ThunderClan begins to heal, and Leafpool makes Jaypaw a full medicine cat at the half-moon meeting, Jayfeather. He thanks Bright Spirit for the guidance towards Winclan, and they return to ThunderClan. Back in camp, Brambleclaw is exhausted, taking over the whole clan by himself, and accidentally assigns Ashfur to 2 patrols, causing a small argument to sprout up between the 2 Toms and Squirrelflight. However, the second short story is over. It is now chapter 22. There are 28 chapters in this book. I believe almost all of you know what's coming. Hollyleaf is upset that her brothers left her out of whatever they were doing and intends to talk to Lionblaze about it when the thunder crashes and a fire starts. Hollyleaf, Lionblaze, and Jayfeather meet Squirrelflight, who tries to help them escape despite the weakness she still has from her extensive wound in the war from the last book. But as they are trying to cross a cliff on a tree Squirrelflight shoved over, Ashfur suddenly blocks the way. He says this is revenge for Squirrelflight abandoning him in favor of becoming mates with Brambleclaw, and he also helped Hawkfrost nearly kill Firestar in order to hurt her. As a last-ditch effort to save her kits, Squirrelflight reveals that Ashfur can't hurt her by killing them, because they aren't hers. Ashfur then pivots to saying that he will reveal this secret, but he leaves, and our three protagonists keep their lives. None of them believe Squirrelflight was telling them the truth at first, and then they're mad at her, but they have to keep moving forward because Ashfur's threat now looms over them. Hollyleaf hates Ashfur and wants to find out who their parents are, but Lionblaze just wants to keep Ashfur quiet. Interesting to note is also that Hollyleaf's immediate assumption is that they might not be clan cats at all and are instead the kits of a loner or a kitty pet, similar to Daisy's first litter, Millie, Brooke, and the other cats who have been scorned earlier in this arc. For a moment, they all doubt that they're part of the prophecy at all, but this doesn't go anywhere, as Lionblaze instead gets worried about why Tigerstar trained him, if not because they were kin. Despite Squirrelflight, Jayfeather, and Lionblaze all begging, or in Lionblaze's case threatening, Ashfur, he doesn't back down, and as of the morning of the gathering, only Hollyleaf is left. She isn't Firestar's kin, and she wants desperately to be one of the three, having worked more than anyone to rise to importance and leave her mark on the clans. With keeping that legacy secured as her motivation, she too confronts Ashfur and tells him he doesn't scare her. Ashfur runs away gleefully, and we hard cut to that night, when the clan is on their way to the gathering, Squirrelflight arriving late with mud on her pelt, and they find Ashfur dead in the river. Ashfur doesn't have an on-page vigil, but instead a session where cats discuss what could have happened to him. Leafpool finds out he was murdered, and accusations are quickly thrown to WingClan since he was found at their border. Lionblaze, knowing exactly which cats would have reason to quarrel with Ashfur, thinks to himself that they need to keep the secret of what happened the night of the fire forever. This is where the book ends. This is a dense book, but in a different way from how Eclipse was dense. Rather than being packed with character elements and developing relationships, this book is stuffed with 3, arguably 4, complete plots. Breaking down Soul's takeover of ShadowClan, the sickness in ThunderClan and time travel to the Ancients, and the fire scene and its aftermath. The book does often feel disjointed because of this, and each plot having to overlap or rush to finish before the next one comes in leaves no room for the characters to breathe and contemplate how they feel. In fact, in the times where they do express a desire to talk to cats about what's going on or have a moment to process, they are quickly cut off by the next oncoming plot. If even one of these plots was cut completely, they might have had time to flesh out the others and allow our characters to react to and change in response to the shocking experiences they're going through. But the arc has already spent 4 books doing what amounts to nothing, so they have to go fast. With what we have then, I'm going to go through each story one by one. First, let's talk about the Soul wrap-up things. Soul himself only appears twice in this book, once while the protagonists are spying on his speech in ShadowClan, and once when he appears to Hollyleaf after everything is said and done. And in both cases, the power he is meant to have didn't come across. Blackstar seemed to be the only one who agreed with Soul. Everyone who was enough of a background character would just follow his lead, and his motivations for doing so are confused in a way I will cover in a minute. As for Hollyleaf, at the time where he confronts her, she was entirely disinterested in listening to him at all, and he didn't make any attempts to pry into her psyche. Not that he could, after he abandoned her and her brothers in front of them in the same chapter as he first earned their trust. Anyway, that scene ends without him having made any effect. Soul is definitely a character who was intended to be made powerful by learning about his opponents and taking advantage of their mental weaknesses. But in practice, he has now been here for the better part of 2 books and has only even appeared as a background element, with little effect on either our main characters or the clans at large. But where those clan effects are concerned, I have a different problem. ShadowClan's, Blackstar's, entire conflict is framed around faith, even when that isn't presented textually as his main problem. StarClan tells Jaypaw he needs to return faith, and then tells Blackstar he needs to believe in his ancestors, and what finally convinces Blackstar to drive out Soul is just that his ancestors exist and watch over them. When Soul has taken over ShadowClan, they stop following some parts of the warrior code, but their main problem is just not looking to StarClan anymore. I'll be honest, this is just silly. StarClan is known to exist, factually. Blackstar and every cat has seen that numerous times. The fact that StarClan exists shouldn't be what needs to be proven here. Blackstar's issue before Sol arrived was shown to be that he doubted StarClan's decisions, and his own, because the clans haven't really been any better since they settled at the lake. He was especially unhappy with the level of hostility that existed between the clans. ShadowClan under Sol then being more hostile and more concerned with borders, but just not believing that StarClan exists doesn't seem like a logical extension of that idea. It's just odd, what can I say? As for the second plot, The Sickness, this one is actually the most long-lasting, as it starts in the middle of ShadowClan's takeover and is wrapping up hastily at the beginning of the chapter that contains the fire scene. However, it doesn't amount to much of anything. We don't see Jayfeather's new, more positive feelings about being a medicine cat applied here, and it is mostly used as a way to inject some foreshadowing and, honestly, filler to create some sort of main plot for the book. Some of it is good filler, like Jayfeather noticing that Graystripe is worried about Millie in the same way he was worried about Silverstream, and some of it has no real meaning. Ultimately, though, the only long-term effects of the green cough are that Jayfeather gets his name, which could have just as easily been done after he invented a brand new healing method for Cinderheart, and that Firestar loses a life. At the time this book was released, we were only aware of 3 other lives lost. He lost one to Scourge in the Darkest Hour, one while he was saving One Whisker and ShadowClan from the Two Legs in Dawn, and another in Firestar's quest when he was attacking the rats with SkyClan. This is his 4th known life lost, which means that he needs to die another 5 times before it has any lasting effects, and no other cats died at all. Much like the war in the previous book, this ends up feeling more like filler, whether interesting or not, because of its lack of effect on the narrative, rather than because war or sickness or even traveling are inherently meaningless. Of course, in the middle of the sickness, we suddenly take 5 chapters to time travel instead, and that is even more obviously filler than the rest of this. As of now, all we know is that Jayfeather went into the past as a cat he wasn't and knew nothing about to spend a week learning about the ancients without bonding much before being tossed back into his own life. Assuming we never see any of these cats again, and he certainly has no lingering feelings for the cats he left behind, there is no point to this endeavor. And before I move on to the last part, I just want to repeat for the 100th time that Jayfeather is not Jayswing. They are distinctly different cats, and Jayfeather doesn't identify with him or share his feelings on things. Okay, so, the fire scene. Most people know at this point that Vicky conceived of this scene back while she was writing the new prophecy, and built the arc around the kits who would end up here. Because of this framing, the kits themselves have sometimes been sidelined in their own story, and not having enough development or focus on their values has caused the reactions after this electric scene to be somewhat muddled in the grand scheme of things. What does it mean that Hollyleaf believes they aren't part of the prophecy anymore? How does Lionblaze feel about Tigerstar having lied about the reason he trained him, or about his mentor being a manipulative murderer? How does Jayfeather feel about any of this as a cat who can read Squirrelflight's feelings and knows that she loves her kits no matter who had them first? We don't really have time to answer any of that because by the time it happens, there are only 3 chapters left before the Gathering and Ashfur's death. We don't have enough time to think about who would mourn Ashfur and what they would say, not knowing what he did to the protagonists, because by the time he is brought back, there are only 2 more chapters in the book. We don't have time to consider any specific potential culprits, because by the time we find out Ashfur has been murdered, there are only a few pages left in the book. Thus, his death is left as a mystery, and its effects on the characters left for the next book to determine, all because we have wasted so much time on things unrelated to the characters' values or Ashfur's death in the arc up until now. Considering Vicky actually did know where she wanted the arc to go this time, if she had more time to consider outlines before sending them in, I have no doubt she would have worked out from the beginning who her protagonists were, rather than discovering them only in book 3, 4, or even 5, and that she would have built in more time after Ashfur's death to address the repercussions. As it is now, though, we have only 1 book left in this arc. 1 book to wrap up every character, plot thread, and maybe make something of the whole Powers prophecy that has loomed expectantly over the arc. I guess we'll see what all is made of the story then when we return to Power 3 in a later episode of our trip through time.